Hello, and welcome to How to Conduct the TFI for PBIS Schools and Training, presented by Wilder Research and Minnesota PBIS. This training video will help new TFI facilitators understand more about the Tiered Fidelity Inventory Tool, or TFI, for PBIS. It is important to note that most of the content in this video will be focused on schools and training. Those schools that did not go through cohort training or schools that are out of training may find most of the content in this video to be useful. Wilder Research will also post another video that is specifically focused on schools out of training. The goal of this video is to help you understand more about the Tiered Fidelity Inventory Tool, or TFI, for PBIS. We will provide instruction on what the TFI is, how to conduct a TFI and TFI walkthrough, the sign-up and coordination process for schools and training, and how to use your data to make decisions and action plan. We will refer to both the TFI manual and the walkthrough tool throughout this training video, so you will want to have this tool printed or available on another screen before continuing with the presentation. The walkthrough tool is located on page 28 of the TFI manual. This is available for download at pbisapps.org. Before we get started, we want to give you more background information, or the nuts and bolts of what the TFI is. In this section, we will cover the purpose of the TFI and how it is used, who conducts a TFI, what school teams in training are responsible for, and when TFIs are conducted throughout the school year. The TFI, or Tiered Fidelity Inventory, is a tool that is used to measure how well a school team is implementing PBIS. It helps school teams to see where their strengths are and where their PBIS initiative needs some work. The TFI addresses all three tiers and focuses on those elements of PBIS that are the most core to achieving student outcomes. We will only be discussing Tier 1 of the TFI for this training video. This is the only tier of the TFI that is administered at cohort trainings. Once your school is out of training, you may go ahead and start assessing Tier 2 and Tier 3 when you are ready. So now that we know what the TFI is, let's talk more about why school teams should use this tool. One of the hallmarks of PBIS is data-driven decision-making. In order for your school's PBIS initiative to be successful, you should plan on looking at data derived from the TFI and other fidelity assessments and use it to make decisions about your school's PBIS initiative. Schools can use the TFI as a formative assessment, meaning if a school is just starting the implementation process or if they are rejoining PBIS, they can use the TFI to see current PBIS practices that are in place and those that are needed prior to launching or relaunching their PBIS initiative. The TFI is a progress monitoring tool. Since teams in training take the TFI 4 times per year, they are able to see where they are improving and where opportunities for improvement exist. Finally, the TFI can be used for action planning. Teams should use the results of the TFI to create effective plans to improve areas in their initiative that need it. If a school team scores at least 70% on each tier of the TFI, it can be said that they are implementing PBIS with fidelity. If you are a new school that is just starting to implement PBIS, it is not expected that your school will be at 70% right away. It will take time and focused action planning and school-wide efforts before your school is implementing PBIS with fidelity. So be patient and don't get discouraged. Therefore, it is important that you use your TFI data, even if you have a low score or might not be implementing certain components of the PBIS framework quite yet. Well, why would we want you to do this? Well, it gets you in the habit of collecting data and doing this assessment at your school. Over time, your school will progress, and using the TFI will help you track your progress with PBIS implementation, as well as help you target your action planning toward areas that need the most attention. Now that we have the purposes and uses of the TFI outlined, we will go over what schools and training are responsible for in order to complete the TFI. On or before the very first training, school teams should select a person who is willing to be trained as a TFI facilitator. It is strongly encouraged that teams select a person who is not the administrator to take on this role. Well, why not the administrator? Because the TFI facilitator will be committed to being out of the building for a scheduled time at another school. We realize this might place a burden on administrators who may have a difficult time getting away from the building during the day. Your TFI facilitator should plan to do the following. First, watch this video to get more information about how to conduct the TFI. Second, observe the RIPs and trainers as they conduct the TFI at fall and winter trainings. Third, they should be ready to conduct the TFI with another school's team at spring training and help them to action plan. Finally, these facilitators should visit their partner school outside of training to complete the TFI walkthrough and TFI facilitation at that school and help them to action plan. Of note, the person who gets to be the TFI facilitator can use this as a professional development opportunity. Also, this is a benefit to your PBIS team to have someone visit other schools, as Minnesota PBIS considers this to be a mutually beneficial learning experience. The TFI facilitator learns to conduct assessments as well as collects ideas from other school sites when they visit them for the TFI evaluation. The other school gains from the TFI facilitators impartiality, guidance around action planning, and sharing experiences and ideas with the school team. School teams are responsible for conducting the TFI 4 times per year, once at each training, and then your external facilitator will come to conduct the TFI with your school team in the spring after training is completed. This usually takes place in March through June. At this time, the external TFI facilitator will visit your school and conduct a walkthrough and the TFI assessment with your team. This person will also help your team to action plan based on your results. Once you have data from the TFI, your school team should be using the results to inform your school's PBIS action plan. The data derived from the TFI will help you to identify strengths, challenges, and areas of contention based on the data and TFI facilitation process. We will discuss this more toward the end of this presentation. This data calendar gives you an idea of when your school is expected to complete the TFI throughout training. To recap, your school will conduct the TFI at all 3 regional trainings and once again in the spring after training is completed, usually in the months of March through June. By having a regularly scheduled time for data collection, you will be able to look at trends over time and see variance that occurs as part of implementing any evidence-based practice program, such as PBIS. This next section will discuss how facilitators are trained and the timeline for training and TFI facilitation. At fall training, a team should plan to select 1 or more of your PBIS team members to be TFI facilitators. The person who is selected to be a TFI facilitator then watches this training video. One thing to note is that your school does not have to have just 1 person trained to conduct TFIs. Feel free to select more than 1. This is helpful down the road if ever someone needs to take a leave of absence or can't conduct TFIs in the future. At winter training, TFI facilitators should plan to observe the RIPs and trainers and conduct the TFI with their school team. The TFI facilitators should feel free to ask any questions of the RIPs and trainers and take notes for their references. At spring training, the TFI facilitator signs up for a partner school. This person, who is the TFI facilitator, will conduct the TFI with their partner school at spring training. This is the school that they will also conduct the TFI walkthrough and facilitation at their partner school outside of training in March through May. The new facilitator is observed by a trainer or RIP at training and is given feedback on their facilitation techniques. One thing to note is that the TFI facilitator should plan to write down the results on paper at both spring training and the spring TFI visit outside of training. This paper copy will serve as a backup to entering it on the computer in case of a power or Wi-Fi failure, or in case the TFI doesn't get saved correctly on PBIS apps. The new facilitator is observed by a trainer or RIP and is given feedback on their facilitation techniques, like I just mentioned, but this is also an opportunity for the new facilitator to ask questions about TFI facilitation or any other questions they may have. Remember that a TFI facilitator signs up to be with a school at both spring training and completing a TFI with that school, TFI and TFI walkthrough at their partner school after training and before the end of the school year in March through June. The TFI facilitator works with the PBIS coach and administrator at their partner school to come up with a mutually agreeable time to visit the school and to complete the TFI. The TFI facilitator will also help the school to action plan based on the TFI results. A school team member who is not the TFI facilitator at this time will submit the scores for the TFI on PBIS apps. Wilder Research will work with TFI facilitators to remind them of who their partners are and when they signed up for training. Wilder Research will also support new TFI facilitators in any questions that they have. Therefore, the TFI facilitator should also confirm with Wilder Research that they have completed the TFI with their partner school. This next section will discuss the sign-up and coordination process for schools in training, how to sign up a training for your partner school, directions on how to coordinate with your partner school, and where to go for help with any coordination problems or questions. Like I mentioned before, at spring training, schools will sign up and exchange with another partner school. You will be given the opportunity to do this at spring training. And here are some suggestions about what to look for in a partner school. So it could be close geographically, the same grade level or type of school. So for example, an elementary school could match with an elementary school. These can be within your same district, and this does not have to be in your cohort. You could also sign up for more than one school to facilitate the TFI and TFI walkthrough at with your administrator's approval. When coordinating with your partner school, the biggest piece of advice that I often give to school teams is to be proactive and schedule something right away. One suggestion for coordinating your TFI visit date is after you complete your TFI at spring training with your partner school, go ahead and work with the PBIS coach and administrator to find a time and date on your calendars for you to come and do the walkthrough and facilitate the TFI right then and there. It saves you time and an extra step of contacting them again after training to find a date. Remember that the TFI walkthrough is conducted first. The facilitation session can happen during a PBIS team meeting or after school if needed. You just have to make sure to get your walkthrough done before school is out, because for the walkthrough you will be interviewing teachers and students. Another helpful tip is to be sure that the school team has their login information to PBIS apps and their passwords before the assessment is completed. If they don't have this information, they should contact a regional implementation project or RIP in their area to help them get this set up and get this information so the TFI can move smoothly. Before you go, make sure that you confirm your facilitation date with the principal or administrator and the PBIS coach a week before and also the day before to remind them that you're coming. If anything comes up and you have to reschedule, please let your partner school know immediately so you can find a new time. One thing that helps is knowing the 3 to 5 school rules and the ticket or acknowledgement that they give out to students before you go. I would record this in the TFI Facilitator Guidebook that you print out and in the walkthrough tool. This will help you to get started right away as you get to the school. Also, remind your partner school that they should get a list of their permanent products together so they are ready to review this during the TFI facilitation session. Here are some more tips for school teams and TFI facilitators before the TFI assessment. TFI facilitators should encourage school teams to do the following before they complete their assessment with you, the outside facilitator. They should define the schedule. When will the TFI be conducted and where will that happen? They should define the personnel. Who will be present during the TFI? Who will participate in the evaluation? They should also plan to review existing fidelity and outcome data. So school teams should plan to review their other implementation fidelity assessments like the SAS, effort data, and outcome or any ODR data before the TFI facilitation is started. Reviewing the action plan isn't a bad idea either for school teams. A list of possible products that will be used during the TFI session is on the next slide and is also available in the TFI facilitation guide. It's a good idea for school teams to get these together before the facilitation starts in order for it to go smoothly. That way you don't have someone rifling through the file cabinets trying to find these as the assessment is going on. Before the facilitation begins, the TFI facilitator will conduct a walkthrough, and there's more information on how to conduct a walkthrough coming up in the coming slides. Here's an example of those permanent products that will be needed during the TFI. These are what school teams should have on hand during their TFI facilitation session. As the TFI facilitator, you could provide the principal or PBIS coach with a list of materials needed for this TFI facilitation. Make sure you get this to them at least a week in advance so they have time to gather this information. More information and more examples of permanent products can be found in the TFI facilitation guide. Sometimes things happen. We get it. Your partner school isn't responding to you. You unexpectedly have to take a leave of absence or anything else that comes up. Never fear. Wilder Research will be sending regular updates to remind you to schedule the TFI if you haven't done so already. If you're having problems, those emails and phone calls are a good time to ask for help if you need it. However, you can certainly contact any RIP or Wilder Research before that happens. If anything arises, please let Wilder Research know right away so we can attempt to fix the situation. You can call Thalia or you can email pbisevalmn@wilder.org so we can find you a new school partner or a replacement facilitator if you are no longer able to complete the TFI on behalf of your school. This next section will describe how to conduct the TFI with another school team, including the walkthrough, facilitating the TFI tool, and helping the team to action plan. Just a reminder, bring a pens, pencils, and a clipboard so you can record the TFI on paper. Plan to arrive at the school at least an hour before to allow time to complete the TFI walkthrough. Make sure to check in at the office to get a ticket and an acknowledgement or reward slip, and let them know you are there to conduct the TFI and the walkthrough. Also, be sure to write down what the 3 to 5 school rules are and their nickname, such as the 3 R's or Flyer Pride, so you know them before starting the walkthrough. This next section will cover how to conduct the TFI walkthrough portion of the assessment. The walkthrough tool is completed before the TFI assessment is conducted with the PBIS team. Again, this is found on pages 27 and 28 of the TFI Facilitation Manual. The information used in the walkthrough is used as a data source for some of the questions when facilitating the TFI. To complete the walkthrough tool, the TFI facilitator walks through the school to find staff and students for short interviews. Staff answer 3 questions and students will answer 2 questions. The TFI facilitator will interview at least 5, but preferably 10 to 15 staff members and ask the following questions. What are the school rules? Have you taught them to students this year? Have you given out any tickets since 2 months ago? Also, the TFI facilitator should find at least 10 students and ask them what the school rules are, and also if they've received any tickets in the previous 2 months. An example walkthrough form will be shown on the next slides. Of note, the parentheses are there to insert the information from the school. So, for example, you would ask, what are the 3 R's? Have you given out any paws since 2 months ago? These are intended for personalization, and so students will recognize the nicknames. Here's what the blank TFI walkthrough tool form looks like. When filling out the walkthrough tool, it is important to remember that when recording the school rules, just record the number of rules that they know. You don't have to write down the specific rules verbatim. So for example, if the 3 rules are be respectful, be responsible, and be kind, you can just write down, 1, 2, or 3 that they know. This will save you time in counting and tallying in the end. In a few minutes, we'll go through an example of how to score and record the TFI walkthrough tool. Here are some tips and guidelines for conducting the TFI walkthrough. Please make sure that you do not interrupt classroom instruction time to complete the walkthrough tool. If you see staff in their room with no students on their prep hour or during lunch, you can certainly approach them, but if there are students in the room and they are clearly in class, please don't walk in and interrupt them. Common areas like the cafeteria, library, and hallways are great places to locate students and staff who might be willing to talk to you. One other tip is to get a good mix of students and staff to get the most accurate data. For example, interview students in multiple places and look for staff who have different roles in the school, such as bus drivers, cafeteria workers, paras, even parents. Next, we're going to go through how to score and record information for the school on the TFI walkthrough tool. This is the top of the walkthrough form, and you can see that our evaluator recorded the school name, which is Purple Rain Elementary, the district, date, the state, their name, which is the Revolution. They also included the name of the school-wide expectations, which are the 3 B's, and the name of the acknowledgement system, which are Purple Raindrops. The evaluator should also check the box as to whether this is a pre or post assessment. If a school has had a TFI conducted before, consider this to be their post assessment. If a school has never done a TFI, or they are doing this before they attend their very first cohort training, the pre-box should be selected. Here's Purple Rain Elementary's walkthrough scoring form. You will notice at the top that the evaluator inserted the nicknames for the school rules, the name of the ticket, and the month. So you see the 3 B's, Purple Raindrops, and January of 2017. This is helpful when reading the questions to staff and students during the interview. After you are done interviewing staff and students, take a few minutes to tally the scores for each category. For the school rules column, tally up the number of students and staff that answered at least 2/3 of the school rules correctly. So for Purple Rain Elementary, since they have 3 rules, this means that every staff person or student that knew 2 or more school rules is added to that tally. There were 11 out of 15 staff that knew at least 2/3 of the school rules. I usually take it one step further and calculate the percentage for these categories to make it easier on myself when we are conducting the TFI. For the yes or no questions, tally the number of yes answers and divide that by the total number of students or staff interviewed to get your percentage. For example, 9 out of 15, or 60%, of students stated that they received a raindrop since January of 2017. The walkthrough tool is used as supporting evidence for Tier 1 for items 1.3, behavioral expectations, 1.4 for teaching expectations, and 1.9 for feedback and acknowledgement. We will go through each of these items individually in the next slides. The walkthrough itself can also be used for action planning. For example, 73% of Purple Rain Elementary staff knew 2/3 of the school rules. The team could use this as a benchmark to increase that number to 100% for the next TFI in their action plan if they deem that this is important enough. More examples and guidance of how to action plan around the TFI are coming up in the next sections. You'll notice that the TFI walkthrough tool is used here as a source for the score for TFI item 1.3. A school can only score a 2 for this item if at least 90% of their staff can name at least 67% of the school rules. In our example of Purple Rain Elementary, they would not score a 2 because only 73% of staff could name at least 67% of the school rules. You will also look to the TFI walkthrough for item 1.4. For this item, a school team can only score a 2 if 70% of their students can list 67% of the rules and expectations. For Purple Rain Elementary, 87% of their students knew at least 67% of the rules and expectations. Assuming that there is a formal system with written schedules that is used to teach expected behaviors in place, Purple Rain Elementary would score a 2 on this item. The last item in Tier 1 that specifically lists the walkthrough tool as a resource is item 1.9. Note that in order to score a 1 or a 2, the acknowledgement system has to be used by at least 90% of staff and or received by at least 50% of the students. In our example, 80% of Purple Rain Elementary staff have given out a raindrop in the last 2 months, and 60% of Purple Rain students report getting a raindrop in the last 2 months. Since they didn't meet the 90% staff benchmark, this would contribute to a lower score for this item based on their TFI walkthrough. After you have completed the walkthrough, it is time to sit down with the school team and facilitate the TFI. Before you begin, make sure at least one person from the school team is logged into PBISapps.org and that they select the TFI under the Open Survey windows. Make sure everyone has a printed or electronic copy of the TFI to view during the evaluation, and also make sure that the team has their data sources ready for review. The TFI will appear in the Open Surveys list. The team member in charge of entering data should click on the Take Survey button to get started. Another reminder for the team member entering data is that after you are logged into the survey, enter the date completed. Then select who is completing the TFI and who completed the walkthrough tool. If you have an external evaluator with your team, the choice will always be an external evaluator, as shown on this screen. Next, click the green button with the arrows at the bottom right-hand corner of the page to continue your TFI facilitation session. During the TFI assessment, each item will follow these 5 steps. Step 1, for each item, review the purpose, feature, data sources, and scoring criteria. Step 2, each question item is read out loud to the team. Step 3, review the data sources for each item. And step 4, all team members vote whether the item is not implemented or 0, partially implemented or 1, fully implemented or a score of 2. Finally, the vote is recorded following an opportunity for discussion. So step 1, you review the item. Each item of the TFI is structured by feature, data source, and scoring criteria. Each item is structured in the same way. The feature will explain the PBIS feature that is being evaluated. The data sources will list the data source, where they should be present, and how to arrive at the score. The scoring criteria is the same for each item. 0 is not implemented or not in place. A score of 1 indicates that the item is partially implemented, and a score of 2 indicates that the item is fully implemented. Here is an example of an item from the TFI, which is item 1.5, problem behavior definitions. The feature for the problem behavior definitions is the school has clear definitions for behaviors that interfere with academic and social success, and a clear policy or procedure for addressing office managed versus staff managed problems. So, how do we know that the school has this feature in place? We look to the data sources, which could include the staff or student handbooks, the school policy, or a discipline flowchart. The scoring criteria for this feature is as follows. A school would earn a score of 0 if no clear definitions exist and procedures to manage problems are not clearly documented. A school would earn a score of 1 if definitions and procedures exist but are not clear and or not organized by staff versus office managed problems. Finally, a school would earn a score of 2 if definitions and procedures for managing problems are clearly defined, documented, trained, and shared with families. Each of these 3 items is read aloud and reviewed by the school team. Step 2, read each question item out loud. Go around the room and have each PBIS team member read the question items out loud for separate items. This will help to slow the team down and get them to think about their responses. Step 3, review the data sources from each item. The data sources should be what informs the team members' vote. Remember, team members may believe something is in place and may want to keep moving on to the next item. But it is important that you, the external evaluator, reviews the data sources with the team so you can complete an accurate and impartial evaluation and to ensure that the school has evidence to back up their votes. This could also help team members who are newer to familiarize themselves with these items and enhance their knowledge of PBIS at their own school. So we've read through the feature, and before you ask the school team to vote, have them take a look at their possible data sources. For this item, 1.6, discipline policies, we see that the PBIS feature is that school policies and procedures describe and emphasize proactive, instructive, and or restorative approaches to student behavior that are implemented consistently. For this item, we want to examine the discipline policy, the student handbook, and the code of conduct, and possibly an informal administrator interview. Step 4, it's time to vote. All team members will vote based on the data sources if an item is not implemented, partially implemented, or fully implemented. Here's a tip. Have team members hold up their fingers 0, 1, or 2 to indicate their vote. Another idea to reduce bias is to have school team members show their votes on the count of 3. This way they avoid looking at each other or the administrator and changing their vote based on these assumptions. A question we often get is, what if someone doesn't want to vote on a particular TFI item? That is perfectly okay. A team member can just sit back for that item and indicate that he or she does not wish to vote. While it is in the best interest of the team to have as many people vote on as many of the items as possible during the TFI, we understand that sometimes people will be new to the district, their position, the school, or PBIS. If a person feels like they do not know enough to vote about a certain question, they are more than welcome to sit back and not raise their hand to indicate a vote. Another question that can sometimes stump facilitators is, Hold on, what if not everyone agrees? What if there's no majority, a tie, lots of indecision, or a vocal minority who just won't let it go? What is a facilitator to do? We've all been there in these types of meetings, groups, etc. We hope that the TFI facilitator can help the team reach a consensus by. Here are some strategies that can help bring the TFI facilitation session and PBIS team to consensus. You could ask each team member to explain why they voted the way they did. You could also ask them to review their data sources again carefully to be sure that the evidence they have backs up their votes. You could allow the team to discuss so they can verify with one another and come to a consensus. You should also allow for a revote if needed. If there is lots of disagreement on whether or not a particular item is in place, this is an opportunity for the facilitator to document, as this might be a great item for the team to action plan around. After the team has voted, step 5 should be entering data. Once again, data are recorded on pbisapps.org. A reminder that the TFI facilitator should record the results on paper and also check in with the person who is entering the data on PBIS apps, just to be sure that you are both entering the correct score for each TFI item. This is what it will look like entering scores on PBIS apps. After the team has voted on and discussed each item, the person from the school team who is logged into PBIS apps should enter the score for each item for Tier 1 into the survey. This will only be items 1.1 through 1.15. Once again, as you are entering scores, the TFI facilitator and the person who is recording online on PBIS apps should double check each score for each item before entering to be sure that data is being recorded accurately. After you enter your scores for Tier 1, again, they only need to be entered for items 1.1 through 1.15 if you are only doing Tier 1. You stop after 1.15. It is okay to go ahead and scroll past Tier 2 and Tier 3 and just leave them blank. When you are done with 1.1 through 1.15, you can hit the green arrow button at the bottom of the page to submit. This arrow comes after item 3.17 annual evaluation. So after you click the green arrow button, it will bring you to this page. You do not have to enter any data on this page. Instead, you will scroll down and click the Submit Survey button to submit your data. And here's what that looks like. You know you are successful when this screen appears after submitting the data. After this screen appears, if you wait a few minutes, the team will be able to see their TFI results and get reports from PBIS apps. Now that your school team has their data from the TFI, the external facilitator's job isn't done yet. It's time to help the school team action plan, because that's ultimately what we want to do, right? Use data to make decisions and drive our PBIS school initiative. First, we will go through some examples of the different reports that you can use when pulling data to use for the action planning process. This is an example of the total score report. It provides the overall score of the TFI for all 3 tiers. Since schools in training are only completing the TFI for Tier 1, it is probably best not to use the total score for action planning at this time. However, if you do facilitate the TFI for a school that is sustaining PBIS or is out of training, they might want to look at this data to get an overall picture of implementation fidelity for the TFI. Here is what a scale report looks like for the TFI, and it lists the percentage score for each tier of the TFI. Again, this could give you a good overall picture for the overall score of Tier 1 or any other tiers that the school assessed on during the facilitation session, but it does not have enough detail to use for action planning purposes. Next, this is an example of a subscale report. It is definitely a place where a team can begin to see their implementation level scores for each of the 3 categories of the TFI: teams, implementation, and evaluation. In this example, it looks like the school's most recent TFI, their lowest scoring area was implementation. That should be a signal to the team that this is an area that they should be action planning around, especially these question items in the TFI. The most specific way that a school can action plan is by looking at the individual item scores in Tier 1. In this example, you can see how much the school has improved for each TFI, going from 0s to 2s. A facilitator and the team can look for these lower scoring items to select areas to action plan around. For this school, items 5, 6, 8, and 11 appear to be great places to start the action planning discussion. One thing to remember when action planning overall is the phrase, small wins that could have big effects. Look at the possible data sources. If a school team is struggling with a particular individual item on the TFI and they don't have a data source like a matrix or a professional development calendar or other items, a school could action plan to create these and help to bolster their score for this item. The purpose of taking the TFI or any PBIS implementation fidelity assessment is to action plan. Never take any PBIS assessments without using it for continuous improvement of implementation and action planning. What's the point of collecting data if you don't use it? Teams should plan to choose 1 to 3 items to action plan around that they will specifically look at for progress monitoring. In essence, they want to increase their score for those specific items on the TFI. These items could be chosen based on areas of the TFI where they scored the lowest, or areas where there was the most discussion or disagreement around the topic during the evaluation. The external facilitator could also ask, what are the easy wins, or what are the lowest hanging fruit when looking at areas to plan around? The team should also work during this time to develop a plan to share with the other school staff so they are aware of and can provide help where and when they are needed. The external facilitator, if they are comfortable doing so, should plan to offer their advice and thoughts to help the team to action plan. The next slides show some concrete examples of action planning items that school teams can use. So if you get a school team that scored low or had a lot of discussion around items 1.1 and 1.2, this is the team's subscale of the TFI. One suggestion is they could contact the PTO to see if there is a parent who is willing and interested to join the PBIS team. Invite them to attend your monthly meetings. This is for item 1.1. For item 1.2, you could assign monthly roles and develop a monthly agenda template for your PBIS team. If a team is looking to action plan around implementation, they could increase the number or percentage of staff that know the school rules based on the TFI walkthrough for item 1.3. They could also share the discipline flowchart with parents at their next open house night or conferences for item 1.5. Or they could provide staff with refresher lesson plans in needed areas, and this could be determined by your data. Another action planning suggestion is to review classroom versus office managed behaviors flowcharts with school staff at meetings. If a team is looking to action plan around evaluation or using data, a few suggestions are they could make sure that the PBIS team schedules time to look at their school's data and also schedule time with the administrator to review data. You could use the TFI 3 times per year to check your progress and use it for progress monitoring. You would take the TFI, but you would also specifically focus on the tier and those 1 to 3 items that you chose for action planning. For items that are not a focus, you could keep those scores the same as your initial assessment. You could also share data with staff in monthly newsletters if you want to increase your score for item 1.10. Here are some additional resources if you have additional questions about conducting the TFI. Here are some organizations and people that are definitely willing and ready to help you. If you want to contact MDE directly, there's an email address. Or if you want to conduct specific people at your regional implementation project, we have information for the Metro, North, and South regions. Or if you'd like to conduct wilder research, we have an email address specifically set up for all PBIS questions and assistance. Here are some other websites that you could, if you're interested in more information. PBISapps.org, the OSEP Technical Assistance Center, which is Oregon's main PBIS website, or Minnesota PBIS, which is pbismn.org. Thank you very much for taking the time to view this webinar. If you have any questions at all, please contact Wilder Research. We are more than willing to help you with anything that might arise. Thank you.